Hello, and welcome to On Geopolitics Explorations, and to our series on war. I'm Bill Hurst, and in this opening episode, we'll begin by asking one of the oldest and most persistent questions in human history. What is war, and how should we understand it? War is as old as human civilization. It is one of the most dramatic expressions of collective human action and violence. It is also one of the most studied, theorized, and reflected upon phenomena. And yet, we do not really have shared answers to basic questions about it. From ancient poetry and military treatises to philosophical excursions and contemporary international relations theory, thinkers across millennia have attempted to understand what war is, why it happens, how it evolves, and what it means for the politics of societies that it touches. So let's begin by tracing a broad intellectual history of how war has been conceptualized and understood. We'll move from the heroic and the divine in ancient epics, through classical and medieval strategic and philosophical frameworks, to the political and theoretical analyses of the modern era, culminating in interdisciplinary and increasingly complex debates that shape contemporary discussions about war, how to prevent it, and what its effects are likely to be. We will explore the causes of war, the nature of conflict, the effects of war on political structures and processes. We'll examine the tension between the idea that war is politics by other means and the opposite argument that war represents a rupture or an exception, a suspension of normal politics. Let's begin in ancient Greece. Many of the earliest reflections on war come to us through poetry and myth. Homer's Iliad is more than just a war story. It is a profound meditation on honor, fate, and the human cost of conflict. Achilles, the central hero, embodies the dual nature of war, both heroic and hubristic. He is unmatched in combat, but undone by his own rage and grief. In the Iliad, war is both divinely ordained and deeply personal and contingent. The gods intervene freely, shifting the balance of battle according to their whims or competition between one another. Yet, amidst this divine spectacle, the epic focuses on the agony and foibles of individual humans. When Priam, the Trojan king, begs Achilles for the body of his son Hector, we see perhaps a most vivid example. Greek tragedies like Trojan Women and the Persians offer an even bleaker view, highlighting the suffering of non-combatants, the cruelties visited upon the defeated, and the moral ambiguity of victory. Greek historians moved beyond myth and pathos. Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War is often credited as the first work of political realism. He analyzed war as fundamentally the product of human machinations and political necessity. He attributed the outbreak of war between Athens and Sparta to fear, honor, and interest, an analytic triad that remains central in many framings today. Xenophon and others took similar, if slightly less comprehensive or nuanced perspectives. In roughly the same historical moment, in China, we see the publication of the Sunzi Bingfa, usually translated as Sunzi's Art of War, a radically different approach to the same phenomena. For Sunzi, war was not about valor, glory, or fate, or honor, fear, and interest, but rather about knowledge, deception, discipline, and systematic application of strategy. An ideal general could win without fighting, even at the center of an active conflict, by gaining an advantage and demonstrating to his adversary a daunting balance of power. War is fluid and a dynamic art where intelligence and foresight can be more valuable than force or resources alone. Less a game of chance and more one in which the probabilities, and certainly an opponent's estimation of them, can be manipulated. This juxtaposition Between Homer's heroism and Sunzi's calculating restraint and manipulation of the real or perceived balance of power, offers a glimpse at the range of thinking on war in the ancient world. In the Roman world, war was an instrument of empire, but also central to legal and moral discourse and debate. Cicero articulated the concept of just war, bellum justum. For Cicero, legitimate war must meet three criteria: lawful authority, just cause, and right intent. This laid a foundation for later Christian thinkers who further developed the just war tradition and whose work shaped medieval and early modern European conceptions of legitimate conflict. That is, wars in which God and right are on our side. Yet Roman practice often diverged sharply from such lofty rhetoric and high principles. The brutal suppression of rebellions and the expansion of Roman rule place this in sharp relief. In his Agricola, the historian Tacitus quotes a speech by the Caledonian chieftain Calgacus, who said pointedly when facing the Romans at Mons Graupius, roughly between present-day Aberdeen and Inverness in eastern Scotland, Aufere trucidare rapere falsis nominibus imperium, atque ubi solitudinem faciunt, pacem appellant. That is, pillage, murder, the seizure of power under false names, and where they lay waste, they call it peace. In another part of the world, medieval and early modern Chinese literature also grappled with the moral and strategic dimensions of war. Grand novels like The Romance of the Three Kingdoms, or《三国演义》, and Outlaws of the Marsh, 水浒传, depict legendary battles, scheming generals, cunning tacticians, and stunningly complex intrigue, diplomacy, and double-dealing. These epic novels are rich with multifaceted characters facing ethical, personal, and political dilemmas. Warfare is depicted as a test of virtue, but more so of strategy. Not just brute strength, but intelligence and intellectual adaptability. They also reflect a deep historical memory of periods in which civil war fragmented an otherwise relatively cohesive Chinese empire. The oft-quoted opening line, of actually disputed authorship, to the preface of《三国演义》reads, 话说天下大事分久必合合久必分. It is said that the overall trend of the realm is that long divided, it must be unified. Long unified, it must be divided. Indeed, this ebb and flow of state strength, social cohesion and prosperity versus fragmentation, civil disorder, and decline has long been such a core feature of Chinese historical scholarship that it continues today to shape political ideology and even sometimes policy debates. Thus, both the Roman and Chinese traditions offer frameworks for understanding war as not merely violence, but as a social, moral, and political phenomenon. Even as the Romans tended to focus on war at the fringes of empire, while Chinese and medieval European observers were more frequently concerned with the rather different threats of war within the Middle Kingdom or within Christendom, respectively. A critical turning point in the theory of war, or in discussions about war, came in the 19th century with Karl von Clausewitz. Written in the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, his On War, Vom Kriege, reflects both Clausewitz's military experience and philosophical rigor. He saw war as neither pure chaos nor perfect calculation, but rather a dynamic, interactive phenomenon shaped by chance, logic, and passion, but always in the service of profoundly political objectives. War is a continuation of politics by other means, he famously said. War for Clausewitz was thus not opposed to politics, but was politics in another form beyond the boundaries of the quotidian or beyond the boundaries of the state. This idea reframes war as a tool of statecraft, one that must be understood in terms of its political purpose, not merely its military execution. But Clausewitz also introduces a crucial caveat. War is never purely rational. Its course is shaped by the interplay of different actors, each with ideas about war rooted either in passion, reason, or chance. Clausewitz also developed concepts like friction and the fog of war. Together, all of this underscores the non-linear, emergent nature of conflict and the way in which states and actors can find it difficult to be completely confident in predicting any outcome. And with the costs of negative outcomes so high when it comes to war, even minor doubts or elements of unpredictability can cause a wariness to wage war or to continue the fight. Clausewitz's legacy transformed the way in which we think about conflict. He shifted the conversation towards systematic, political, and institutional analysis, and in so doing, laid the groundwork for much of the subsequent study of war and security competition in international relations. The 20th century was shaped by industrialized, absolute, or total war. World War I introduced mass mobilization, mechanized killing, and the bleeding stalemate of trench warfare. World War II escalated these trends. Strategic bombing, genocide, and nuclear weapons redefined the boundaries of warfare. Civilians became targets. The post-war era brought nuclear deterrence and the Cold War. Scholars began to focus on ideas of deterrence, mutual assured destruction, and strategic stability. Game theory became a tool of war planning and political analysis. International relations theory turned towards systematic models, probably most famously the one that eventually came to be known as realism, taking a name from Otto von Bismarck's concept of Realpolitik. Realism viewed war as a function of states' struggles to survive and to compete in an anarchic and mortally dangerous international arena. Others, though, bristled at such attempts to simplify or abstract, instead stressing contingency, discursive framings, or emerging international rules, structures, norms, conventions, or institutions. Constructivists and liberals, respectively, as they called themselves, have battled the realists ever since. More recently, a school of thought sometimes slightly confusingly termed neoclassical realism has emphasized the importance of domestic politics in defining states' national interests and in mobilizing coalitions to pursue them, sometimes in ways that wouldn't be easily predictable for purer realists. Much of this maturation of the field was the direct result, though, of multipolar conflict giving way to a more comprehensive bipolar competition. That is, the Second World War and the First World War before it giving way to the Cold War. Many powerful states formed complex alliances to fight one another in the Second World War, but the post-war order came quickly to be defined as a global struggle between two superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. Realism, then, inspired particularly by influential proponents like Hans Morgenthau, dominated early Cold War thought. As the Cold War progressed, others like Kenneth Waltz crystallized and refined many of realism's central ideas into what came to be called neo-realism. At the same time, liberal and institutionalist theories also gained some traction. Scholars like Robert Cohen and Joseph Nye began to challenge the realist notion that ultimately only power and the balance of power mattered, arguing instead that a complex of interdependent economic, environmental, and institutional connections, structures, and rules could reduce the likelihood of war. The United Nations, the Bretton Woods system, and later the European Union were all seen as ways to mitigate anarchy, facilitate stability, or even provide some form of supranational governance. But even as direct superpower conflict became less likely in the latter phases of the Cold War, proxy wars, rebellions, and civil wars proliferated, seemingly all the more frequently in areas relatively remote from spheres of true superpower dominance. Clausewitzian thought, which saw war as a continuation of politics by other means, began to be re-examined in light of unconventional warfare, guerrilla tactics, and anti-colonial or ideological battles. Scholars questioned whether traditional models of war still applied in a world dominated in many ways by nuclear arsenals and in others by terrorism, insurgency, and irregular conflict. In the post-Cold War era, the nature of war has continued to evolve, blurring old boundaries between interstate and intrastate conflict, and very frequently, even between combatants and civilians. Technology, too, has transformed war. From drones to cyber attacks, new tools challenge traditional distinctions between war and peace, civil and military, or deliberate and accidental. So-called gray zone tactics and operations, everything from airspace incursions to undersea cable or pipeline damage, to cyber attacks on business and industry, to terrorist attacks by loosely, or at least deniably, associated non-state groups active in third countries, have become almost more commonplace today than traditional declared state-led conflict, and are especially attractive to any party facing truly an asymmetric disadvantage. If you know you cannot win on the battlefield, the only way to give yourself a chance is sometimes to take the fight to the street or to the internet, to engage in stealthy or at least deniable maneuvers, and to expand the range of potential targets to include civilians, critical infrastructure, and ordinary businesses and other institutions. All this makes the systematic analysis of war far more difficult, but also, I would argue, more urgent as we move further into the 21st century. So what, in the final analysis, is war? It's not merely the clash of arms or the movement of armies. War is a deeply embedded, multifaceted social and political phenomenon. It reflects our histories, our values, our fears, and our ambitions. War is shaped by, but also critically, in turn, shapes ideology, economy, culture, and emotion. It can be said to be simultaneously legal and extra-legal, rational and irrational, ordered and chaotic. War is most especially political. It is a contest of wills among polities, a struggle for power and legitimacy. But it is also psychological. It mobilizes fears, hopes, hatreds, and aspirations. It is the continuation of politics by other means, yes, but it is also a sort of unpredictable exogenous shock, the effects of which redound across domestic and international politics, often for many years after hostilities have ceased. The shift from swords to muskets, from cannons to airplanes, and now from ICBMs and aircraft carriers to drones and cyber warfare does more than just alter tactics. It can reshape the very logic of war and stymie the functioning of any institutions, agreements, or other orders we may have constructed to stave off or to contain conflict. Understanding war is essential not only for coming to terms with its effects and preventing its recurrence, also for comprehending the very nature of political life, both within and between states. As we continue in this series, I'll be joined by a variety of guests who will help us to delve deeper into understanding war from very different angles and perspectives. Thank you for listening, and please do join me for the next episode.